Welcome, everybody, to Mindset Monday. It is, I think it's October 19th, somewhere around there. I am here with Rob Thompson. This is Mindset Monday. I'm Denise, Zack. I'm a life coach, and I started this podcast working with GamePlanU today just a few months ago, because one of the things that I really love doing is kind of getting in between the 6 inches between your ears to really figure out kind of what goes on when you make the decisions you make, what goes on when life goes wrong, and how do you get through it. And one of the people who really encouraged me to do this was the gentleman that you see here, Rob Thompson, who is he is the founder and CEO of GamePlanU. I'm going to let him introduce himself, but he really encouraged me to branch out and start this because he thought it was an important thing for people to know, especially in mentoring and giving back and helping people to improve their lives and feel better, especially during this pandemic and stressful times. Everybody struggles a little bit with something. And if we can take one little kernel or nugget away from this podcast, if anybody can who's watching, then I think that the job is done. So without further ado, Rob Thompson, thank you so much for joining me. Thanks so much for being here. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I started my first podcast about 5 years ago. So I'm going to kind of shrink it down a little bit. So I started about 5 years ago, and I started the podcast out of the sheer need to connect with people that were outside of my network, if that makes sense. And I saw the people doing podcasting, and I thought it was a great hack. I thought it was a great way to provide someone with a little bit of value without asking anything in return. But a podcast was a way to have anybody at that time. For me, it was executives in the sports industry to share their story, to share their career story. And 9 out of 10 always said yes. So it led me down a road of doing other things besides a career path that I was on at the time, writing a book about working in sports. And then the podcast led me back to my alma mater. Eventually, creating that content opened up awareness to what I was putting out there into the digital universe. So So to go back to the podcast, why I thought it was important, I knew what it did for me. You just recently retired from higher ed, and I said, Denise, this is something that you need to do to push out your energy and your experience, and to allow people to share their stories and connect with as many people as possible. But for most of my career was spent in the sports media industry. And now, like Denise said, we started GamePlanU, which Denise works with us on. And we try to help as many career seekers and sports tech founders, help them and give them a voice in the industry, and then help connect them to influencers, collaborators, and sometimes investors.
Yeah. And it's a great business. It's something that is so rewarding because you're not just, plugging away, trying to make dollar for dollar. It's one of the organizations or a kind of organization that is really focused on the well-being of its community. And the discussions that we have behind the scenes that a lot of people don't realize is how can we help? What can we do? What would be more valuable to our community? How can our career seekers benefit from this? What would help them grow? And I love that. And I wasn't in on the ground level when you started GamePlanU. So tell me, why it was so important for you to develop something like this, to really have a community of people, like-minded people, come together, but in a way where you're helping to shape their future and really help them grow.
Well, I saw that there's a disconnect, and obviously with platforms like podcasting, and these digital channels, if used correctly and if used with the right agenda, meaning helping connect people, sharing information, that you could do so much good in the world. And my goal of GamePlanU is to really connect those career seekers with opportunities in the sports industry. The byproduct of that happened to be sports technology. When we first came up with the idea, we started really noodling around with it. It was really to connect those students coming out of high school on a discovery path into the industry, saying, you could still study accounting and marketing and everything else or even engineering for that matter, and you could find your way back to the sports industry some way if that's of interest to you. What we realize is that it's easier to have access to sports technology founders and startups in the remote space than it is to try to help people connect to teams or leagues or where those doors are harder to get through. A lot of times you have to relocate geographically. And there's just a higher level of networking that you have to go through. So we found that this narrow lane, it's a long lane, but it's a narrow lane of sports technology startups really need that support. And then on the other side of it, those interested in the industry of sports really bypass looking at technology as a viable option to explore and discover a career in the industry. So we put those two together. We created this ecosystem, and we really focused it. I mean, Denise, for the most part, you were part of the beginning of it, so you missed all the messy stuff, and now we got to the real good stuff. So you're there, and the important stuff. So, the energy behind it, working with innovators that are going to change the way that we watch, consume, and engage in sports. These are the folks that are on the forefront of it, whether it's betting, esports, social media, new media, wherever that may be within the industry, sponsorship sales, tickets, how you're going to get food delivered to your seat, all of those avenues that are teams and leagues and media companies and brands are going to look for. These are the folks that are at the forefront of that. And to be a part of that at the early stages is super, super exciting and something we didn't see when we first started off.
Yeah. And I love that. You said it's a narrow lane, but to me, it's so diverse in that lane. There are so many different aspects to the industry and so many different opportunities to help and support along the way, to help these founders kind of grow their businesses and to help our Career Connect students to build their portfolio and their resumes as they're kind of getting out into the world. So I think it's a really, really cool business that I think separates itself from a lot of other regular accelerators, right? There's just different aspects to this. And so digging a little deeper, what is it about you that makes this important for you? Now, what is it that makes this a goal for you? That's, you've got a full-time job, you're doing so many other things, but you've always been an entrepreneur at heart. I know that. But tell us a little bit more about why GamePlanU.
Well, there's so many folks out there, and the way that the world is headed now, and even before, the careers that our parents and our grandparents grew up with, where their goal was to get a pension, their goal was to work even in a union, and to work 35 years at the same job. That's not reality for our world. That's just not. Maybe we kind of got in at. We got grandfathered into it, but some of us, especially our peers, didn't, and definitely our kids will not. And so it's an on-demand, it is a freelance culture of business that we are now 100% going to be faced with. Everybody's going to be working remotely. I bet not everybody, but a good 80% of the workforce could be working remotely. So I started to see this at the time that that a platform like ours is connecting those folks that maybe needed to see and discover where their skill sets match. And that could be a founder, that could be a career seeker. And how do they match into where they could monetize that asset being them. Yeah. And monetize in a way that they understand that there may be a world that you have to run a multi-million-dollar business with 2 or 3 people, or you may be the employee number 3. You may not be working inside sales for the Yankees as your first job. It may be working for a startup. So this is that space that connects between a career seeker, a founder, and an investor. And we're just the ones that connect the dots on that. So I don't know if that answered your question, but
yes, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And Rob, what would you say is the hardest part about, this is a startup, right? I mean, you're helping startups, but this
Yeah.
is a startup. What's the hardest part?
I think for anything, it's like we all struggle with just prioritizing, having a passion or a purpose, anxiety, stress, all these things come together. And I think for me, it was, I was always after and looking for that next thing, and because I just knew the business is, especially in the industry, there is no long term,
Yeah.
whether you're an athlete or whether you're an executive in it, there is no term. So I always kind of looked at, man, I wanted to be in a position to kind of that thing that I can control.
Yeah.
And, so GamePlanU to me is the best of things that I've always envisioned. Like I
Mm.
couldn't wait to be that person who sat on the other side of the table that was making that big decision. I wanted to be that person that could sit on the other side of the table that was the investor,
Yeah. Right.
At the end of the day, we all have a boss, right?
Yeah.
Even if you own your own business, you still have a boss. And the boss may be the bank, the boss may be the client, the boss is your customers, the boss is your spouse. You're always going to have a boss.
Yeah.
But man, when you get to choose who your boss is, that's pretty powerful. And you really like working for that person or that group or that entity. That's magical,
Yeah. Yeah.
And for me, I spent 30 years finding that right situation.
Yeah.
And I feel like GamePlanU was something that I created it in my mind that is that perfect landing place.
Yeah.
That it's a collaborative effort, that everybody has a stake in it. And that includes even the folks that come to us, like the founders. They have a stake in this thing as well. So
Yeah.
I don't know. That to me was kind of that if I could create something as near perfect as I could in an organization, to
Yeah.
me, this is it.
Yeah. And it's so cool because what just happened in that last question is exactly what I have come to I've known for years, but have come to really learn through GamePlanU is like quintessential Rob Thompson. I asked you like about a challenge and you talked about the stress and anxiety, but in like 30 seconds you flipped it over to the positive. And that is something that you have always done. I mean, I've known you for 20, how long have I known you? A really
30,
long time.
30
30
something.
years. It's
Yeah.
a really long time.
Yeah.
I don't want to admit it, that I'm getting
We're
that
old,
old,
Denise.
but
We're
right,
old.
I know
Yeah.
we are.
Yeah.
It's so
I know.
sad.
It's sad.
But you always see the bright side of things. You always see the silver lining. You always see the light at the end of the tunnel, and that is really, really hard to do consistently and all the time. I think people have to struggle to do that. I think people can do it, but it is like it's second nature for you, So I'm just curious where that comes from.
Being involved in sports, being a student athlete or just being an athlete and playing at the level where you're down by 10 points, you got 2 minutes to go, and you're like, it's over. Okay, start the bus.
Right.
And you just know one more play, one more try, don't give up, stay in it, stay in it, stay in it, stay in it. You won. And to me, that's life. And then I also learned that, man, sometimes you lose the ones you're not supposed to lose. Sometimes you lose that client you're not supposed to lose or the relationship you're not supposed to lose. But guess what? There's a tomorrow. You get up and you learn from it and you brush yourself off and you realize sometimes it's just not meant to be, regardless of whether you're the most talented, you're the most you have the best situation, you have the most money, you have the most everything. Sometimes you're going to lose. And you're going to lose when you don't deserve it. And you're going to win when you don't deserve it. So to me, the metaphor of sports is applied to my life, knowing that I always have tomorrow again. And when I win, the one thing, if for those who did play, college or pro sports, when you won, practice always got harder that next week. the next day, always harder. The coaches were always harder on you. When you lost, they're a little bit nicer. And you're always like, why are they like that? We just won. They should be happy. Why aren't they happy? They're just pushing you to be better, to be better, to be better. And to me, that's a metaphor of life. And I just, I might be crying on the inside and sweating on the inside when these things happen, but you can't, negativity and all those things don't matter. So you always have a last shot. When you look at entrepreneurs, if you're into that kind of place, when you look at some of these folks that didn't make it, I met a guy, his name, I won't say his name, but I met a guy, he's an alum of our university and an incredible guy. And he had startup fail, startup fail, startup fail, startup fail until his very last one. And he was 62 years old. And he had multiple marriages because of it. He just, but he was so determined and persistent. The last one he finally hit.
Yeah.
And to me, that is, but all what he went back and said, what a lot of people went back will tell you is that he learned more than during his failures, and every single one of them, whether it was a failure in business or a failure in marriage, he learned along the way. And the last one, he said, the stars finally aligned, but I realized when the stars were aligned in this one.
Yeah.
And anyways, so that's a very long answer to a simple question, but
no, it's perfect. You're just kind of talking about that mental toughness that we were chatting about a little bit earlier with our interns today. It's just, how do you get to that space that separates you from someone who's going to be successful or not? It doesn't matter how much skill you have. It doesn't matter how great you are. If you don't have that mental toughness, if you don't have that mindset, when you come up against a really big challenge, the skills are only going to take you so far. You've got to have that mindset to be able to keep you in the game, right? To keep you competitive, and to keep you focused on what your goals are, instead of getting kind of mired down in the anxiety and worry and fear that could topple you.
Yeah, I had it today. I started thinking about all the things I have to do this week, become overwhelming, and then just like we talked about, then I just put them into small little bites. Instead of looking at the bigger picture, I just break it down. I don't make a to-do list. I make a list of things that I want to get accomplished. So once I look back at those things, and then it's not always little tasks, that's in my schedule, but I'm thinking about bigger things every week. And, but those bigger things are things that I want to aim for. I may not get to them, but I at least I could see them. I write them out. Once I write it out, my anxiety starts to go away. So, yeah.
So that's a strategy for you then. Like if you were to kind of talk with someone, you would challenge them or encourage them to put a list of things that you want to accomplish, like goals for the day. Like wrap your head around what it is you want to accomplish, and then what steps do you need to take to get there, and take off those like bite-sized chunks that you're talking about, right?
Yeah, because it's sort of like, we make things up in our brains. Like we always try to predetermine how things are going to go, like a conversation. You look at an email for an hour and you're just like traumatized by that email. Then you realize the next day, oh, well, that wasn't that bad, So I force myself not to make up scenarios in my own brain on certain things. Yeah. And realizing that most people aren't out to get you. Most people aren't there to make you look bad. Once you understand that people are focused on themselves, that's okay. And then you can work around that. But clients aren't out to get you. Maybe you don't have a good enough product, or you don't have a product that's good enough, or your coworkers aren't out to get you. Maybe you're not in the right job or in the right position, or not happy with who you are as a person. All those things matter. And it's not necessarily always the job or the person you work with. It's you internally. Like, are you happy? Are you fulfilled in your personal life and your professional life? So all those things kind of add up. And, anyway, so to get back to it. So organizing and put things into smaller bite size, I think for me personally, it helps.
Yeah. And I love the fact that you said we all kind of talk to ourselves and tell ourselves a story. I actually do an entire, in the workbook that I'm writing, there's one chapter that is dedicated to storytelling, how it hurts us and how it helps us. Right. And that worrying about the future and fretting about and overthinking the past do nothing but ruin the present moment. And in fact, when we have a situation in front of us, when we start negative storytelling and spiraling and overthinking and ruminating and catastrophizing, the only thing it does is keep us from being able to focus in the moment and accomplish what we need to accomplish. And so all that storytelling is so important, because it is true. What you say to yourself becomes your reality. What you believe becomes your truth, even if it's not true. So I love that metaphor, around just knowing that you do have a story, and pay attention to it. Pay attention to what you're saying to yourself and how you say it to yourself. And if it's leaving you feeling worse, or if it's leaving you feeling better, decide if you can change it. You may not be able to change the base problem, but you can certainly change how you manage it, structure it, work through it, and eventually overcome it.
I agree.
Yeah.
No, I definitely agree. I think we're our own worst enemies on everything for the most part. Yeah, but we could also be our biggest cheerleaders. And I think self-awareness on what you're good at, what makes you tick. I had to look at myself even this morning, Monday morning. It's like, okay, I got a little bit of, I'm fired up. I got a little anxiousness here. Why am I feeling that way? Like, let me write it down. What am I anxious about? How am I going to fix it? What are the things that I'm grateful for? And I'm able to kind of re-engineer, recalibrate my feelings quickly. And a lot of times it's just writing stuff out, and you realize all the things that you think you got to get done, or what's holding you up, or the stresses that you have in your life, or how the pandemic is going to ruin the world, and the election and everything else. I just put those things out of my mind because I can't do anything about it. Right. And let me just control what my little world is here. Let me just control that part of it.
Yeah.
And it kind of recharges me up. But that's, but self-awareness for me was earlier on. That helped a lot, because then I was less judgy about myself. Yeah. And sometimes, I have to be careful, because I don't want to put myself down too much, because that never works in anybody's favor. Because you're trying to feel like if you say something negative about yourself, it makes you feel better because you want to acknowledge it. But that's not a good technique, But
yeah,
I knew I had self-awareness earlier on in my life and my career, and then I just worried about that. I went all in on the things that I knew that were my strengths, and
I love the fact that you talk about gratitude and kind of re-engineering, because when you're thinking and focusing on what you're grateful for, you can't be upset. It's like the two things don't coexist together. Focusing on what you're grateful for, what's good in your life, really does. It actually activates a part of your brain that calms you down a bit and brings you into a more focused and relaxed place. So I love the fact that you have this, and I know you do that every morning too, right? Like, this is something you do every morning. As you think about what you're grateful for, you think about what you want to accomplish that day, you write it down, and or talk it out with someone, and you go, right?
Morning routines are so important, and I just think, whether you're not a morning person or you are a night person, whatever, but your morning and how you start your morning off completely is the foundation for your day. Yeah. And so I do a self-reflection. I do a gratitude. Sometimes I say the rosary when I walk, anything that's going to kickstart your mind, and in a positive way. I don't always listen to music in the morning, because sometimes that could make you just fantasize a little bit. Sometimes, you just put yourself, I don't know if that's always good. I think you need to kind of direct your thoughts a little bit more. But that took me a while, because I had to look back into things in my life that I felt like when you hit a low spot in your life, whether in your career or your life, you think about all the things that were going well for you. And you think about, what were my habits? What were the things I was doing at that point? And I had to go back to those moments, and kind of build that back up again, So, and it was 80% mental for me, and it was really 80% mental on kind of working through those things, and then coming up with my daily routine that set that tone for the day. So, you know.
And being disciplined enough to know when you're in those low places to actually do that, because I think a lot of times when people go through those low periods, they kind of lose their motivation, they lose their way, they lose their focus. So the fact that you're able to do that, like, let me ask you this: how, when you were in that low place, like your lowest low, how did you pull through? How did
Yeah.
you figure
Yeah.
that out?
So actually, just saw this. It was funny because I just, I was like, I knew it's like I got to snap. Like you kind of like, man, how do I snap out of it? Because those moments you just don't want to get out of bed and face the day, right? And you're like,
Yeah.
then you start looking for those comfortable moments that you search for in your schedule. You're like, oh,
Yeah.
that's a good conversation I could have. I started scheduling in parts when I know I had like, big group meetings or client calls that are always uncomfortable. But then I realized that those things earlier on, I always try to schedule those for early because those kind of create calluses in your mind a little bit, and almost like you have calluses from working out, on your hands, but you could get calluses in other parts of. It's almost like muscle memory,
Yep.
like
Yep.
riding a bike and stuff. And to me, it was like that. It's like, man, if I have a challenge earlier on, it's good. It fires me up. So. I started doing that a lot more, just to kind of push myself mentally. And if I felt like if I have earlier victories, I could have bigger recoveries in a day if I get a challenge that I didn't see coming my way. I don't even know if that was the question I was answering, but it sounded pretty good.
Yeah. No, I was asking you how you kind of came up with that plan of how you, when you were in your lowest place, like how you figured out what you were going to do and how you motivated yourself. But I think, yeah.
That was a little bit of it, but
Yeah.
it was really about snapping myself out of it. Mel Robbins, Denise, I think I turned you on to her.
Yeah.
She had a book called she has a book called The 5-Second Rule.
Yeah.
And it really was about kind of counting backwards to kind of snap yourself out of it. Like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go in your mind. And I've used that so many times since I've read her book. I'd listened to her book. I didn't read it. I listened to it on Audible.
Yeah.
But
still a book.
it's still a book. But she talked about how anxiety and all of those things got to her when she was at the lowest moment of her life as a mom and running a business and losing her job. And although mine wasn't that extreme, it was still, I needed to kind of step out of it. So I started using 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Boom, get up, change your mind.
Yeah.
Clear your head a little bit. Stop procrastinating. Anyways, that was it.
No, I love it. I think it's great. I mean, it's, you've known what your goal is. You've known what you've wanted to accomplish, and you paid attention to the tools and the skills that you could pick up along the way that would help you when you needed it. I think books come along at the right time. I think people come along at the right time, and it's kind of this divine intervention or karma or whatever you want to call it. People are placed in your life, things and situations are placed in your life at particular times to help you when you need it. So I think you've given us some great advice here, Rob. You've given us some really useful tools, skill sets, and things that you've used along the way throughout your journey. So I think anybody watching this is going to be great, going to benefit greatly from all the information you've provided and advice you've given today and sharing. And thank you so much for your willingness to share. Really appreciate it. Any last words? Any comments you want to give?
I just think, just remember, the world's not against you. Your friends and family aren't against you. Your coworkers aren't against you. You're your own worst enemy sometimes. If you stay positive and flip it around and put it into smaller snack bites, don't wish a year away. Don't wish the next 2 months away. Think about today and the little things and the changes that you can make today. And I guarantee it's going to help you tomorrow.
Yeah. So. Awesome. And if people want to get in touch with you, LinkedIn, Rob Thompson 78 there.
Look at you. You're yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Organized, huh?
I know you're organized.
And the website, GamePlanU.org, right? So learn more about our foundation. If there's any founders out there listening, if there's any career seekers out there, check us out, get in touch with us. I want to thank you, Rob, for being here today. I really appreciate your time. And and your willingness to come on. And I know you're a busy guy, so thank you for sharing, for telling us, a little bit more about you and helping us understand you a little bit better. And if you like this podcast, please subscribe below. Join us on GamePlanU today, and spread the word about Mindset Monday. Really appreciate you all being here. Thanks again. Peace out, everybody. Take care.